Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio Early Breakfast.
It's 5:16 a.m. You're listening to me, Nick Ellaby, standing in for Rosie Wright this week on Early Breakfast. It's time for a little run through the papers with Andrew Eborn, barrister, broadcaster, futurist and president of Octopus TV. Is there anything this man doesn't do? Morning, Andrew.
Hi, good morning, and what a joy and indeed a privilege it is to join you, the Robert Palmer of sports broadcasting.
Oh, okay, I see you've been on my Twitter. Listen, Andrew, the pleasure's all mine. We've talked about it there with Terry, but very quickly to touch on this story on the Times front page and this deadline on Boris handing over those WhatsApps or not. Would you let everyone have a look at your WhatsApps during the pandemic?
Well, I think it's very simple, isn't it? I mean, I work on the basis that everything you write, everything you say will end up in the hands of the people you least want it to. And I say that history repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons from history. And it was just a few weeks ago, that Matt Hancock had the same thing with his WhatsApp messages. And it's very simple that WhatsApp themselves, they say, whilst it's all encrypted and they're personal to the people, you know that at some stage people want to have a look at them. And I think if you're a politician, you've got to work on the basis that everything you say and wherever you say it will come out in public. But it raises two interesting things. One, as you know, I'm a lawyer, and there's copyright in WhatsApp messages, and you as the writer of those WhatsApp messages can control what happens to them. The difficulty is the ownership of that copyright will vary if things are done in the course of your employment. And clearly what Boris writes, was Prime Minister, would be done during the course of his employment. So I think they're on a sticky wicket. I always say that the sunlight is the best disinfectant. So rather than fighting this out and talking about full and frank disclosure and arguing about withholding information, they should turn around and say, yes, here they are, there's an awful lot of them, but have a look and bear in mind that WhatsApp is a different means of communication, so it's going to sound far more informal than a long, laboured over letter which has been well constructed.
Fantastic. All right. So, Andrew, I want to take a look at this story on the front page of the Times about some Tory donors withholding their cash. Why is this happening?
Well, it's very simple, isn't it? Little election fever coming up now, isn't it? So you're going to get the key issues. Both sides are going to come out and say what their policies are. And this is all about house building and what property developers are saying. They've traditionally donated millions of pounds to the Conservative Party, but apparently they're considering withholding their funds because they think that the government has become more of a house blocker than a house builder. And they're saying about a fifth of donations to the Tories over the 10-year period, about £60 million, came from housing developers and builders. And the basic sort of traditional Conservative position is about home ownership, and that's got to be right. But ministers have backed down from the target of building 300,000 houses a year in England, and they said it's going to be advisory rather than mandatory, which is why they're sort of taking the pressure off local authorities to approve new developments.
Nice. Okay, Andrew, I mean, what's happening to UK politics? Tories are the party of free speech and Labour now seem to be the party of house building. They're on the offensive with this new pro-building agenda. On the front of The Guardian, the headline is Labour to let councils buy land cheaply to tackle housing crisis. What's this all about?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's not going to be popular with housing developers or landowners, isn't it? It's a wonderful Robin Hood policy. You steal from the rich and give it to the poor. So what they're saying effectively is Labour is planning to give local officials sweeping new powers to buy land cheaply and develop on it. Well, they're going to buy it from somebody, and the landowners are not going to be too happy about it. I absolutely endorse that we need to make property affordable to everybody. Living in central London, as I do, it's a nightmare for anybody to get on the property ladder. And so you've got to look at these as a policies. But I think you've got two extremes there, haven't you? You've got the Conservatives saying, look, hang about, we can't just go ahead with all of these sort of minimal requirements, and Labour putting it the other way, saying, well, we'll take away the landowners' rights to sort of set particular prices, and we'll force them a sort of compulsory ownership, if you like. And it is an extraordinary way of doing it, and this is going to battle out over the media for many more months to come.
Yeah, I mean, I can testify to that. The housing market's absolutely insane at the moment. You know, the rental market, unfortunately, which I'm still on in the capital, is mad. I mean, anything that comes up just goes straight away. And I know a lot of people are really worried about that. Andrew, good story here on your area of expertise. A lawyer in New York's been using ChatGPT to do his research, and it's ended in tears. What's happened?
Oh, it's lovely. Andrew Eborn, back to the Futurist, as we say. So what's happened is that a lawyer used ChatGPT to prepare a court failing, and it went horribly awry. Now, the problem with ChatGPT, and I would recommend that people do try it, is that if it doesn't know the answer to something, it makes it up, rather like a politician being hauled over the coals. Now, in this particular case, it was a Roberto Matta who is suing the Colombian airline Avianca last year, and he alleged that a metal food and beverage cart injured his knee when he was flying into New York, and basically it was out of time. They said it was statute of limitation, but his lawyer submitted a brief and basically dug up all sorts of cases, including Martinez versus Delta Airlines, Zickerman versus Korea Airlines, and Vangees versus China Southern Airlines, all in support of their case. The trouble is, this particular lawyer had used ChatGPT to provide those cases, and they were all fictitious. So they turned up rather embarrassingly in court saying, hang about, these cases don't exist, you're making it up. So the judges turned around and said, you can't admit these. And they've said that the Judge Castell is the name, they've ordered this particular lawyer to basically appear in court on June the 8th to argue why they shouldn't be sanctioned as a result of making this up. So it's what's called hallucinations in the AI world, is that basically ChatGPT doesn't like a vacuum. And if it doesn't like a vacuum, it will make up answers. And that's really, really tricky. So we've had a US law professor who was accused of sexual harassment. We've had an Australian man. He was imprisoned for bribery, and he wasn't at all. But there are safeguards being put in place now, and the master of the role, Sir Geoffrey Voss, he is a big advocate, as indeed am I, about embracing AI, but making sure you have those safeguards in place. So don't rely on it 100%, question everything is what I say, but let's embrace the technology and make sure we have those safeguards.
No, you'll never find you or I making up an answer on this programme. Oh, Andrew,
never.
Do you think ChatGPT could ever produce enough evidence that eventually actually gets used in court? Could this ever happen?
Oh, without a doubt. And I think there's lots of places now. There's something called Case Text, a company have created co-counsel. And what that does is gets rid of these hallucinations that I talked about by saying where it doesn't know the answer, it will basically turn around and say, I don't know, which is something most people should do because it's not embarrassing not to know something. But AI, every single day, there are some fantastic stories about what's happening with AI. I mean, a new superbug-killing antibiotic was discovered using AI, and this has affected, 1 million people a year are estimated to die from infections that resist treatment with antibiotics, and AI has solved that. So we've had a week where people have been sort of worried about the machine taking over and so on and so forth, but it is incredibly powerful. So there are lots of negative stories about, I'm talking about 300 million jobs will be lost to AI, but also at the same time it's going to contribute about a 15 trillion to the economy. So what I speak around the world, as you know, about the advantages of AI, encouraging people to embrace the fantastic resources that it is offering, but also being aware of those risks and things like copyright and so on and so forth. We need to make sure that the rules and regulations are in place, but don't over-restrict, because we are one of the world's leaders in AI development, and long may that be the case.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, well, I mean, be presenting radio programmes soon, probably.
Not as well as you, though. Not as well as your normal one. It's going to be good.
Too kind, Andrew. Rishi Sunak wants to stop kids vaping. Do you smoke, Andrew? Do you vape?
I don't vape and I don't smoke. I'm 7'5". I would be probably 6'4" if I did smoke. The reality is there's a loophole which allows e-cigarettes to be given away to the under 18s. And basically what he wants to do, and it's terrible. If you see these things, you see these kids smoking, you see lots of people smoking these particular vapes. And it used to, when I was growing up, they used to give these little sweet cigarettes you could buy in your sweet shop, you know, made out of candy and stuff like that. And used to have I think it was coconut, which made to look like tobacco. And there are all these things that are designed to make smoking appealing to children. They have wonderful colours and flavours such as fruit and so on and so forth. And what he's saying is that this is not good. And he was worried about his own daughters. He appeared on a programme called This Morning. I know most people haven't heard of that.
We'll touch on that in a minute.
This Morning. Exactly, I realise you might do. And he's saying, look, he's worried about his own daughter, his own children, because they could be utilising these particular vapes. So that's what he wants to do. He wants to clamp down on these free samples of vapes and the targeting of advertising to children. And quite right, too. I think any parents would turn around and say, look, whatever we can do to restrict this, we should do. And the figures are quite alarming, Nick. NHS figures show that 9%, that's 9% of 11 to 15-year-olds now say they've used e-cigarettes, and that's up from 6% in 2018. So it is quite alarming. So Chris Whitty, who Chief Medical Officer, you might have heard of him during COVID, he says there's been a particularly worrying rise in the number of children using vapes, with companies clearly marketing these products at children. So Rishi is quite right to not only appear on This Morning, but also to warn about these particular dangers and to start introducing legislation to deal with it.
Isn't this something kids just do? I mean, I remember when I was 12, I think my neighbour stole a couple of cigarettes off the plumber and we ran down the park and tried them and hated them, and I never touched them again. Haven't kids been doing this the whole time?
Oh, no, of course they have. And smoking behind the bike shed. And if you look at the old comics and so on and so forth, it was all in there. But the whole point is we're trying to look at ways that you can control it. Why deliberately target children in this way? There should be restrictions, and as parents will confirm that the more that you can do to restrict this, the better. But make sure that you get sort of safe ways of doing things, make sure people are aware of stuff. But vaping is a big problem, not least because it's good for people who want to quit smoking. But what they've also realised is some of these vapes have unacceptable levels of lead and so on and so forth. So this is what you need to look at. Make sure it's regulated in the appropriate way. And I think Rishi Sunak is going the right way about it.
All right, well, you mentioned it just there. I do want to quickly touch, Andrew, on this massive storm brewing at ITV. The story will not go away. It's still on the front pages. The Sun, the Daily Express and the Mirror are all talking about Philip Schofield, what he may or may not have done with a runner at This Morning. What I wanted to ask you in your role as director of president of Octopus TV, how do ITV get out the other side of this?
Well, it's interesting. I also host, as you may know, the television podcast for the Royal Television Society in London with Nadine DeReza and the glorious team at the Royal Television Society. And it's all about brand, isn't it? It's all about brand management. I mentioned earlier about basically owning the story and ensuring that we talk about reputation and trust. Well, trust comes in on foot, but leaves on horseback. And the trouble with these sort of stories, if you drip feed it, more and more evidence is going to come out. And I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant. There are so many ifs and buts and who said what, when, who knew what, why, and why didn't they do anything about it, or did they do anything about it? You've got former presenters such as the wonderful Eamon Holmes, who's a brilliant broadcaster and a good chum. He was talking about his experiences and so on and so forth. This is all going to come out until people own the story and say, look, this is what happens, this is what we knew, this is what we did about it, and this is what we're going to make sure that things are in place for the future. And to put a bit of balance, if you like, Philip Schofield himself said, well, it was illegal, maybe it wasn't illegal. It was basically it was of legal age. This is what he's saying. And you have to ask those sort of questions, is put everything in balance. But I certainly believe that you need to get all of the facts out. And the sooner those facts can come out, the easier it is to basically deal with damage limitation.
Andrew, you've mentioned sunlight a couple of times now. We've all been in the pub gardens this week. Very, very quickly before you go, front page of the Daily Star. We're drinking beer wrong. Why?
Well, this is what happens. Don't fear the foam, is what they say. Apparently, the least likely that you have a beer bloat and foam erupting in your belly is to let it erupt in the glass. So they're recommending that you've got to have basically a big head on your beer. And that's certainly what they do in Japan. I travel to Japan a lot. It does raise all sorts of interesting questions about what a pint is a pint. Because if you've got a lot of foam, the basic rule at the moment is you're supposed to have 95% liquid and you're allowed up to 5% foam. The particular report from the Star says it should be much more foam than that. It's a weights and measures issue as well that needs to be addressed. But certainly, I think a good bit of foam will improve the flavour.
Yeah, I agree. Andrew, a bit early for a pint. Very last thing. What's your order?
Well, I'll tell you, I love a local pint and so on and so forth, but I actually drink something called a Boulevardier, which is, it's rather like a Negroni, but with bourbon or whiskey in it, and it's maybe a little bit early for that as well.
It sounds like a drink from Mad Men. Anyway, I like it.
Oh, well, that's one of me then. It's got to be good. It's a great thing.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it this morning. Cheers.
I love it. And congratulations, you were brilliant. It's such a joy to join you.
Thank you very much. Speak again soon. So it's 5:31, a little bit